Hi, welcome to the Counter Tools Counter Tobacco second quarterly webinar. First, I just wanted to make sure that you all can hear me. If you all could just type into the chat box and let me know, that would be great. Awesome. Thank you so much. Got it. Okay, so my name is Rose DeLeon Foote, and I'm a project associate for Counter Tools and co-editor for countertobacco.org. This webinar will be recorded, and the link and the slides will be provided to you sometime next week. So I wanted to start just by going over the agenda for the next hour. We will start with a quick intro, which is what's happening right now. And we will move on to the St. Paul and Minneapolis menthol restriction case study with our speakers Betsy Brock and Alicia Leisinger. And then I will cover the menthol ordinance from Oakland, California. And we will move on to a Q&A section where Betsy and Alicia will be able to answer any questions you have about how they made their ordinance successful. I will also be open to answering any questions related to Oakland's policy if I have that information to offer. So I'm going to go ahead and switch my screen over to Betsy and Alicia.
Okay, hopefully everyone can see our screen now. Okay, so my name is Alicia Leisinger, and Betsy and I are with the Association for Non-Smokers Minnesota, which is a small nonprofit based out of the Twin Cities. And over the last 2 years, we've had the great opportunity and pleasure to work with our community partners on menthol restrictions. So I will walk through some of the details of that. So this whole conversation really kicked off 2.5 years ago now when we did a series of community conversations in both Minneapolis and St. Paul. Leaders from the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council came to Minnesota, and we did a series of 5 conversations, invited community leaders and our partners to hear the information about why menthol is so damaging, and that really kicked things off for us. At about the same time, you can see the timeline here, we worked with both cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, to pass ordinances to restrict the sale of non-menthol flavored tobacco products to adult-only tobacco shops. And we were really clear with our council, and our partners were really made this known that that this was our first step, and that we were definitely coming back to restrict menthol as well. But it was a good kind of first round to get the ordinance in place and have everyone kind of understand what it is we were doing by restricting the sale of flavored tobacco products to adult-only tobacco shops. So those passed 2015 and early 2016 and went into effect, and we were able to kind of test run implementation on these products, which was helpful later on with, or will be helpful with menthol. Next up. So in July of 2016, we really began building our Menthol Coalition, and Betsy's going to talk a little bit more about that later. We began meeting with community leaders to gain some support and plan for our menthol effort. And we created our own menthol campaign that was really useful in educating our community and talking to people about the issue. So here's some of our campaign materials. It's called the Beautiful Lie, Ugly Truth About Menthol Tobacco campaign, really highlighting the beautiful lie that the tobacco companies sell us and the ugly truth that menthol is really damaging to our communities. So we intentionally made it a really positive campaign, and we worked with a local artist to develop the campaign. The people that are featured in these campaign materials are local, real people, campaign or community members, and so we would be out at events, and they're recognizable people in the community. So that was cool. So this was a leaflet we had. This is our fact sheet, just one side of the fact sheet. And then we worked with an artist, spoken word artist, Joe Davis, who's well known in the Twin Cities. And he wrote a poem really highlighting the issue of menthol tobacco. And we made a video out of it that featured a lot of the young people in our coalition. And you'll see they read the poem at different places around the community, so that it was really clear that this was a local effort, both in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So we're going to show the video next. I don't know this video.
Ever since it's been around, just a spoonful of menthol, the poison go down. Smoke-related illness is killing us, disproportionately Black men and youth. Far surpassing any other drug disease or car crashes. And it's no accident the ashtray leads to our ashtray. 要不下一个就进入人民的精彩落，非常检查，都去葫芦都在给股票。Sin embargo, esa no es la historia que ustedes nos cuentan. Ustedes con sus anuncios disfrazan el sabor de la muerte. Ustedes no nos dicen las tasas de la mortalidad, tampoco nos dicen lo que vamos a pagar, la deuda por cada aliento. You're betting on us to ignore the Surgeon General's warning. You improve profit margins when you profit off those in the margins, making us think you're our friends by giving us a bargain. Like a van, parked out on the corner giving away 3 sample cartons. It's all addictive. And menthol makes quitting even harder. It's disgusting to see how you focus your campaign on the young, Black, and dumb. That's the way you describe us, saying the younger the better. Black lungs don't matter, as long as our pockets get better. We don't smoke it, so it don't matter. We're not buying these lies you're telling us. It's all this smoke you're blowing us. R.J. Reynolds said he never smoked it, but he's selling it to us. Sponsoring our favorite concerts, movies, and magazines. But we're here to tell you that we're on to your scheme. We see the ugly truth behind the smoke screen, the beautiful lies that we won't believe. Stop telling us these beautiful lies and ugly truths. Because we ain't buying them. We ain't buying them. Because we ain't buying them. Because I ain't buying them.
All right, so that video really helped us tell the story of how menthol harms our communities and how it's targeted towards African Americans and the LGBTQ community, and really kicked off a lot of the momentum to move a policy forward. We also were out in the community a lot doing education events and different festivals throughout the Twin Cities. So here's our group of young people. We did quite a bit with social media and kind of created this Twitter. Oh, what's happening?
I think those ones have animation.
Okay. All right, hopefully that stopped. So anyways, we were out doing social media a lot with our advocates and garnering some traction for policy.
Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Betsy Brock, and I co-led the work in Minneapolis, and also co-lead the Minnesota Menthol Coalition. So we are a coalition of more than 50 organizations that are working together to restrict the sale of menthol tobacco. It's a really great coalition because there are a lot of groups that aren't really your typical health groups. You know, we have a lot of African American leadership and groups that specifically serve the African American community, people of color. There are faith community, social service agencies, so a lot of groups that maybe don't always focus on health issues, but are really well connected in the community, and we're able to see the importance of this issue. I'm on the right, and my partner in crime, Latricia, is on the left. She couldn't be on the call today, but we co-led the menthol policy work in Minneapolis, and we co-lead the coalition. So Latricia is with a community health clinic in North Minneapolis, and North Minneapolis is where there's a lot of concentrated poverty, a high African American population. So North Point was a great group to lead this work, and we're really happy that we could work together, to move this policy forward. So in Minneapolis, Minneapolis has, they follow a 2-week cycle in the city council. So what that means is that they have a series of committees, and then at the end of the 2 weeks, the issues go to the full council. So we had to move through a number of committees to get to the final vote. So we started in March, actually. We did a kind of just an educational hearing in the health committee, just to kick it off and say we were going to be pursuing this. And then a few months later, in June, we got formal introduction of the ordinance, and I like to call it the beginning of the T-shirt war. So on the flavored tobacco restrictions, we discovered that T-shirts were a really powerful way to show support to the council. So we thought we would replicate that with our menthol work. So we got some tie-dye T-shirts you're going to see that everyone wore. But then also the opposition seemed to have learned how successful T-shirts were as well. So they had their own version, which was red. So you'll see that in the pictures. After about a month, things were moving along, but we were getting a lot of kind of pressure from some council members to really think about maybe instead of this menthol restriction, we should do tobacco 21. So we organized a press conference at North Point with a lot of African American leadership saying, don't forget our community. This is coming from our community. We want you to deal with menthol because menthol really harms our community, and don't sell us out, basically. 4 days later, we had our public hearing in the health committee. We had, I think, over 60 testifiers in support, and we ended up with what we're calling quorum Ghazi. So we lost quorum. The hearing went on for so long that we didn't have quorum anymore, and they couldn't vote on it. And so then we were kind of in a tough spot because we really didn't want to wait for another 2-week cycle. It probably doesn't seem like that big of a deal just hearing that, but we were in the heat of it, and the opposition was extremely mobilized, and 2 weeks we felt was really a risk. So we were able to pull together a special meeting of the health committee on August 2nd. They voted it out of the health committee, and then we had to go to the committee of the whole, which it made it out of committee of the whole. And then August 4th, we had the final vote. The council is 13 members. 1 member wasn't present, 2 voted against it, and 10 voted for it. So here's some pictures. This was the public hearing. So we're in the green shirts, and they kind of had these red shirts. Oops, these have animation. We had a lot of young people testify, which was great. I think that was so important. We had Black leadership testify. This is Juan Jackson. He is the board chair at North Point. there were so many people in support that we couldn't all fit in the city council chamber. So this was a picture of us all on the outside. Here's our city council champion, one of them after we were victorious, coming out to celebrate. Here's another city council champion. We were all pretty happy and celebrating our big win. Here we are, cheering on the steps, feeling pretty relieved. And we faced a lot of opposition in Minneapolis. In January, the tobacco industry flew out Al Sharpton and several other people pictured here, and they hosted a community forum in a local African-American church in Minneapolis, and they were really trying to make the case that this policy would criminalize Black men in particular, and was going to have a lot of unintended consequences, which, you know, didn't make much sense to any of us, since there wasn't going to be any kind of penalty for possessing these products. But I think it definitely made a lot of people nervous. But we were able to kind of redirect, I would say. But once we saw this happen, we knew what we were in for a big fight. And we definitely had a big fight. The tobacco industry hired a PR firm. They hired a grassroots organizing firm. They hired additional lobbyists to work at the local level. You know, Minneapolis is a heavily Democrat city, so they hired Democratic lobbyists. They flew in additional lobbyists. But I think one thing that really worked for us is I stayed in really close communication with the city council reporter. And I just kept her updated on what was happening. And she ran some really great stories that I think helped our cause. They framed it as really kind of the little guy fighting the big guy, the tobacco industry against the community. And I think this really helped us win. So now I'm going to turn it back to Alicia. She's going to talk about how it went down in St. Paul.
Great. So we were coming off the heels of the win in Minneapolis when things really started to heat up in St. Paul. In June and July of 2017, we our coalition members and constituents met with their council members to urge them to move forward with a menthol ordinance. And in early September, it was introduced, and there are seven council members on the St. Paul City Council. And when it was introduced, we had 6 sponsors, and we were like skipping through the hallways. I was, at least, pretty excited about the fact that, oh man, maybe this is going to be a cakewalk. And I shouldn't have been surprised when the pressure really started to heat up in September. The council was really hearing from the opposition a lot. So typically, if it would have kind of gone as scheduled, we would have had a vote at the end of September. But because of pressure from the opposition, we ended up having 2 public hearings in late September instead of 1. There was a 4-week delay in late September. The council wanted to hear more from the business community and talk to them about what could be put in place to support them as we transitioned away from menthol tobacco sales. And so we came back in late October after this 4-week delay, and 2 amendments were passed at that point. One was an extension of the implementation date, or the effectiveness date, which we were totally okay with. The date chosen was November 1st, 2018. That's when it'll go into effect, which was, funny enough, exactly a year after it passed. And the other amendment was to exempt liquor stores from the ordinance. So liquor stores under the ordinance are allowed to sell menthol tobacco products. And we opposed this pretty vehemently, but in the end, the council really felt like that was one thing that they could give, kind of give on, and they didn't think that the case was as strong that kids were hanging out in liquor stores. So on November 1st, they came back for the final vote, and it passed 6-1. Interestingly enough, the one vote was not from the person who was not a sponsor. It was from someone who actually was arguing that he wanted to see it be stronger, a total ban. And so he voted against us in the end. So I wanted to just highlight a few points of our advocacy. There was a number of resolutions of support from different groups in St. Paul, but 3 that I wanted to call out were that the St. Paul School Board passed a resolution to support the ordinance. The Business Review Council, which is an advisory group appointed to advise the City Council, they supported it, which was huge from a business group. And then the Ramsey County Commissioners. Ramsey County is the county that St. Paul is located in, and the Ramsey County Commissioners passed a resolution of support for cities to regulate menthol. We had at least 59 organizations submit letters of support to the council, probably 100 or more emails and phone calls, I'd say hundreds at least, from residents to council members. And we really tried to not have form letters go in, but to have them be from constituents and more personalized, because the opposition was doing a lot of form letters. We met with council members repeatedly. One of the council members was running for mayor, and so we went to mayoral forums and asked all of the candidates if they would support menthol restrictions as a way to kind of keep it in front of him. And we did a lot of advocacy in the media, social media, letters to the editor. We also held a press conference when we felt like we needed to turn up the volume a little bit. So here's our group at the public hearing in our green tie-dye t-shirts. I think the opposition realized that maybe their red t-shirts weren't very effective in Minneapolis because we outnumbered them like 2 to 1. So they put away their t-shirts for St. Paul. We did a press conference in September, and here's our panelists, leaders from the African American community, the NAACP in St. Paul, reverends. It was held at a church. So we got some great press from that, really calling on the city council. Black leaders want menthol tobacco sales restriction. And here's our group at the end of November, or at the end of the city council vote in November, celebrating. Our champion is in the front row, Councilmember Jane Prince in the front row with the brown shirt or brown jacket on. So just to talk a little bit, highlight some of the opposition in St. Paul. Some of the panelists that came to town in January with Reverend Sharpton came back in August and met with some of the St. Paul community leaders. So former Congressman Kendrick Meek and John Dixon, who's with the National Organization on Black Law Enforcement Executives, met with community leaders trying to sell the same story, that this was going to increase or spur a black market, that it was going to increase interactions between police and the Black community. And for the most part, that we were able to squash that because we had already reached out to so many community leaders, but it did cause some wrinkles. Again, Betsy mentioned this, that the tobacco industry hired a local powerful lobbying group, Fakery Baker Daniels, and an Iowa-based grassroots lobbying firm, LS2, to organize against the ordinance. And so we saw fewer form letters when they got more involved, I think. And then the National Association of Tobacco Outlets is basically in our backyard with their leader, Tom Bryant, living here. And they changed their name conveniently to a Coalition of Neighborhood Retailers, and were meeting with council members and doing a lot behind the scenes to oppose the efforts. Things like this. So Russ Stark is the council president, and every neighborhood, every store basically had big red signs out front saying, "Don't close our neighborhood stores." At the gas stations, they were giving away, or they were distributing these flyers or leaflets opposing it and asking people to call their council member. They had a pretty active social media presence. If you were a St. Paul resident, you would see sponsored ads like this one asking you to attend city council meetings, oppose it, and call your council members. So that's it.
Okay, so we came up with some recommendations if you're thinking of pursuing a policy like this in your city. These are kind of our lessons learned. So community engagement is so important, especially on this issue from the African American community and young people. So it's really important to have a strong coalition that can speak up about why this is important, why this is the policy we want, why it addresses our concerns. We saw that, especially in Minneapolis, there was a move to try to substitute in tobacco 21, and because we had such a strong coalition of people ready to come forward and say, hey, that's not what we're asking you to do, we were able to squash that. Number two, never underestimate the opposition. They have so many resources, and just don't underestimate them no matter what. Even if you think you've got it, don't be confident till that final vote. Yeah. And then check in with your city council champion and supporters pretty often. You know, when we started working in Minneapolis and St. Paul, we warned all of the council champions that this was not going to be easy, and you're going to hear a lot of things. A lot of people are going to be mad, but I think people don't maybe fully understand that till they're in the middle of it. So make sure you're checking in with them to say, are you doing okay? What's happening? You're not getting cold feet, are you? So yeah, check in often. And then I think one of our strengths in both places was we had a lot of good messaging, but we also were very nimble, I should say, because along the way we had to come up with talking points to counter a lot of different things we hadn't anticipated. So, you know, why do we want this instead of tobacco 21, or why don't we want these products in liquor stores? So just get ready to come up with messaging as you go along, but also spend a lot of time in the beginning really honing your messaging and getting your coalition on board, using the talking points, sticking to the message. Don't get dragged off of message. Anything else you want to add on that, Alicia?
I think in St. Paul, I think the message that resonated most with the council was from the business community. At one point during the public hearing, a business owner, I think a gas station owner, slammed his keys on the podium and said, and almost in tears was like, you're basically taking away the keys to my store. I might as well give them to you right now, and you're going to close my business. And I mean, they painted a picture of people being starving and homeless on the street as a result of this, you know, the business closures that were going to happen. And I think the council, I mean, that's when we really saw them kind of want to delay things and slow things down. And so we had to come back around with our messaging that, you know, we're as passionate about the lives that are being lost because of menthol tobacco, and really highlight that and highlight our passion. And so I think we could have gotten into a war about how much this was going to cost businesses, and, you know, it's not that much from our perspective, but that's not where our strength lies, and we really needed to make sure that we talked passionately about the lives lost from these deadly products. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, with that, I think, here's our contact information. If you want to talk to us more, we would love to. And I'll turn it back to you, Rose.
Thank you so much. Okay. All right. Thank you, Betsy and Alicia, for all of that amazing information and all of your work to improve the health of your communities. It's really important, and you've done an amazing job. So I already see some questions coming in. Please keep them coming, especially the ones for Betsy and Alicia. They were actually on the ground doing the work and are extremely valuable resources for us right now. Okay, so I will go ahead and move on to the Oakland case study. I was able to speak with someone who is part of Alameda County's ongoing tobacco control program to gather some good information on their experience passing their menthol restrictions. All of the following information was acquired through an interview I had with a member of that program. So the policy that passed in Oakland is focused on flavored tobacco and is very intentional to include menthol as a flavor type. It also prohibits the redemption of tobacco coupons in stores within the city limits, which then limits the industry's attempts to lower consumer costs and keeps the cost of tobacco products a little higher. Studies have shown that policies that impact the price of tobacco products are able to reduce access to these deadly products. The policy does not completely ban the sale of flavored or menthol tobacco products, but restricts them to tobacco retailers that serve adults only. The policy passed in September of 2017, this year, and will go into effect mid-2018. So Oakland's efforts were really spearheaded by the work primarily laid out by the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. Their work around the impacts of menthol tobacco products and targeted marketing on the African American community really pushed the messaging of menthol marketing and sales being a social justice issue, and did the groundwork of educating city council members on the tobacco industry strategies to target low-income communities, African American communities, and youth through flavored tobacco marketing, placement, and pricing at the point of sale. They worked hard to engage city council members around the issue and engage the city council president, who would become co-sponsor for the ordinance. They also participated in leading community outreach and education efforts. Alameda County Public Health Department initially brought the idea of a flavor and menthol restriction to the attention of City Council and worked to coordinate the efforts around policy language, strategy, and community engagement. Change Lab Solutions, which is located in Oakland but works with entities and organizations all over the country, including us here at CounterTools and CounterTobacco.org, offered legal technical assistance and answered all of the questions around the legal risk of moving forward and offered general expertise based on knowledge of flavor and menthol policies across the country. The Alameda County Tobacco Control Coalition was formed as an engagement strategy and included local community-based organizations, larger organizations like the American Cancer Society and the Association for Non-Smokers' Rights and the American Heart Association, local faith-based leaders and leaders of youth organizations, as well as community members who are interested in actively engaging City Council and others. The ordinance's sponsor was Oakland's Vice Mayor, Annie Campbell Washington, who was a strong choice because of her previous experience in working against large industries during her support of Oakland's sugar tax around taxing sugary drinks sold in corner stores, and her investment in healthy retail through that work. Due to the successful passing of the sugar tax, the Vice Mayor was overall unfazed by the potential opposition by the industry. The co-sponsor, Larry Reed, is the council president and represents District 7, a district with a significant population of low-income Black residents that are heavily impacted by menthol marketing, and he also has a personal connection to the issue. This is a map of the larger California Bay Area. You can see the boundaries of Oakland there in the red outline. It is important to note the political climate of the Bay Area and its significance in making this possible. When Oakland was working on its ordinance, several other major Bay Area cities and counties were also working on similar menthol restriction ordinances. San Francisco, just over the bridge from Oakland, the city of San Leandro on Oakland's southeastern border, and Contra Costa County up north around Vallejo were all working on similar tobacco control policies, and Oakland's neighboring city of Berkeley has already passed flavored tobacco restrictions around schools in previous years. The momentum gathering in the area led to the feeling of a connection and movement for the stakeholders and the communities in support of the menthol and flavor restrictions. The social justice frame especially helped launch the support into a larger political movement for those involved. So as far as community engagement, the coalition that was working on this have a partnership with a local community health clinic that is Latinx led, and they worked with a group of youth leaders through that organization to do store assessments of every tobacco retailer in Oakland, peer education, letters of support. They had youth speak at city council meetings, and they also went into the school district and had some of the young people in the schools write letters and send emails. Youth was a big push for city council members, and hearing them speak about their personal experiences was a strength of their outreach. The African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council was in the forefront of all of the education and advocacy around the menthol issues. They had a town hall meeting where the vice mayor spoke and all of the city council members were invited, and over 100 people came out to learn about what was going on in the community on a school night, which is really impressive. When I asked how they got that level of turnout, I was told that they tabled at a lot of faith events, they tabled at farmers markets and at health fairs. And from there, they were able to get a pretty good turnout. And so from that meeting, they were able to create the Alameda County Tobacco Control Coalition, which was comprised of anyone who was interested from anywhere in the county. So they did large group outreach, they talked to local public health organizations, and they engaged other community-based organizations as well. And they encouraged people to set up one-on-ones with leaders from different various youth orgs and faith-based organizations in East and West Oakland. They connected with Black community leaders in Oakland. They also received letters of support and calls from those community members to the city council members. Alameda County also held a policy leadership institute to help Black-led organizations interested in tobacco control understand the issues and figure out how they could become an active part of engaging in pushing the policy. They also, as far as media, submitted op-eds, and there was also a press conference that the vice mayor led. And because they were in this environment where everyone is pushing these new policies, they were able to support one another by showing up to other meetings and press conference events. So as far as messaging and education, this was a major part of what made the Oakland ordinance successful. So as I said before, they did store assessments for every store in Oakland, and they were very menthol specific in their assessments. They also used data from surveys through the school district that asked high schoolers about their use of specific tobacco products. There weren't questions specific to flavors or menthol, but the idea of high schoolers using tobacco products and all of the research around flavors being an initiating force, they were able to make that connection. And they were also able to share with the city council members the mortality rates by cause by district, which I think was really impactful. So the key messaging focus was to have menthol as a social justice issue and identify its disproportionate impact on low-income Black communities, LGBT communities, and youth. They felt like the targeted marketing and youth messaging is really what got community members riled up and ready to push for a menthol restriction. The suggestion that they have around messaging is to keep bringing it back to people's health and lives. It's one thing to talk about how it is someone's choice to start smoking, but when it is purposely marketed to addict people, it becomes another situation and less of a choice. And they also were able to prepare for opposing messages by contacting other cities around the country that have passed similar policies to see the things like whether or not there's a likelihood of a black market. And then they were able to share that data with the community and with city council members and directly address the opposing messages. So the original policy that they proposed was proposed as a comprehensive retailer licensing add-on. So in 2009, they adopted their retailer licensing ordinances, and they had a really good enforcement arm because the fees within that ordinance for retailers were really high at about $1,500 a year. So they were able to funnel a lot of the money from the fees into enforcement. So with that experience, they thought that an add-on would be the best way to do it. Go ahead and buy into some of those funds, and they wanted to start their policy off with as much as they possibly could. So the original proposed policy was a flavored tobacco restriction, including menthol. It included a minimum package price, a minimum package size for cigars, and tobacco-free pharmacies. The final policy ended up being cut down to the flavored tobacco restriction to adult-only retailers, which there are only a handful actually within Oakland's city limits, and restricts the use or prohibits the use of tobacco-related coupon redemption within the city. So while they went in with certain intentions and came out with something that looks smaller and different, they definitely still consider it a success because politically at some point it just became clear that the menthol things would be their biggest feat, and that they should spend their time and energy to focus on that and look at other things later. So to get to this point, this policy had to go through several drafts that evolved over time. It had to be voted on by the Life Enrichment Committee. They had young people come and speak. They suggested an early meeting because sometimes the late meetings can be a lot for young people. So it started at about 4 p.m. and City Council voted on the ordinance twice. It was about a 1.5 year long process, and it started in spring 2016 and passed September 2017. So the major opposition, as we heard in St. Paul and Minneapolis, were the tobacco industry and retailers. A lot of their pushback had to do with smoking being a choice, that young people will get a hold of tobacco anyway, that there will be a black market, that there will be revenue and sales tax loss. They felt like Tobacco 21 was already in place, so why would we need another ordinance? And there was a recent tobacco tax implemented through the state of California, so it's just they felt like it was more pressure, raising costs and lowering sales. So So the vice mayor actually reached out to the retailers and got this specific feedback from them herself. And she was able to outreach to the City of Oakland Small Business Development Department to help stores impacted by the policy and start a conversation around healthy retail being supported for the stores that were interested in potentially transitioning some of their products into a healthier retail space. Tobacco lobbyists actually came and spoke on the behalf of the retailers at some of the meetings, but they felt like there was more strength in the stories and comments made by youth and community members who were speaking their own truths in support of the ordinance. So some of the major challenges that we discussed had to do with city council members being concerned about possible litigation risks, the possibility of a lawsuit, and according to the information they got from Change Labs, the possibility of losing, if it were to go into litigation, would be low. The San Francisco proposal that went through at the same time actually passed through San Francisco City Council, but then the tobacco industry was able to collect enough signatures for it to go into referendum. They said that that wasn't something that they considered as an option or as a possibility. And so once that was happening, they became a little concerned in Oakland, but she thinks the window for all of that happening has actually closed in Oakland, so they should be past that. There were a lot of questions around the black market. People were concerned about inappropriate use of the policy to persecute residents, which is a message that also came from Reverend Al Sharpton when he came with the National Action Network to Oakland, just like in Minneapolis. And in Oakland, they felt it was really important to address that in particular, that message, because it is something that they wanted to validate as an issue while also reassuring people that that would not be an issue, seeing as there is no nothing written into the law that says that possession of menthol or anything like that is something that the police can stop you for. A lot of the other ideas that people had were that people would just go into a neighboring jurisdiction and buy it, so what's the point? But as long as San Leandro and Berkeley are passing laws also, you have to go a little further. Also, always small business closure due to revenue loss, a big barrier for new retailers to open. And also they felt like there may have been some better ways to engage the community, the impacted community in particular, just due to the fact that they were expecting a longer timeline, but it sort of snowballed really quickly, and so they weren't able to engage the impacted community the way that they would, and they would have done more in different ways. And they also wanted to address the city's loss of sales tax revenue. And of course, another challenge would be that the tobacco industry has the money to pay people to come out and protest on the day of the voting. So here are Oakland's recommendations. The first was to identify a strong sponsor and co-sponsor. So as I said before, Annie Campbell Washington was completely unfazed by the potential of the industry coming in and starting litigation. And she had some experience working with large industry before, and also it's good to work off of people's personal experiences. The next is that they proposed the strongest possible policy, and that helped start the discussion from a strong place, but they had to maintain the primary focus, which was the flavors and the menthol, and make sure that they held to that while being willing to compromise on the parts that were not the primary focus. They felt that the legal support that they received from Change Lab helped them end up with an ironclad ordinance, and highly suggest seeking legal assistance when going through this process. Also really focusing on your key messages, making sure that you make those messages relatable. So things like flavored tobacco is for youth and menthol is a social justice issue. Community Partnerships were really important, so mobilizing support through coalitions and organization endorsements from community members. And youth engagement was a major key to success. They also suggest that you engage elected officials as early as possible. The relationship building and education put them in a really strong place, and the council members had the opportunity to ask questions and get all of the issues they need. They also were able to address issues proactively because they engaged city council members so easy. So if a city council member had a question, they were able to actually go out and have conversations and find data that supports what they needed. And also, I think really taking a look at the policy momentum and the landscape at the time. So as all of these menthol policies are starting to roll out across the country, now is the time to really be looking into how you can grab onto that momentum and keep moving forward. All right, so now I'm going to unmute Alicia and Betsy, and I will start taking some of your questions. Okay, so can you hear me, Alicia and Betsy?
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so were you able to find out and publicize how much Al Sharpton and the other panelists were paid to do that forum? Or if you decided not to pursue the payments to the presenters, can you talk about why you chose not to?
There was a great article, reporter, and
Fair warning.
Fair Warning. It's an online paper. He was able to do quite a bit of digging, and he did find out how much some of them were paid. I don't think he found out how much Al Sharpton was paid, but some of the other presenters. And so that was a great article, but I think it came out a little later. I can't remember exactly the timeline.
Well, and we sent people to the event, and I wasn't there. I was on maternity leave, but one of our advocates was able to call them out during their event about who's paying for them to be there.
Yeah, Latricia, I went and just sat in the back, but Latricia went and, because they kept saying they were sponsored by RAI, Reynolds American, so she went up and let everyone know who RAI is. And so I think we were able to do that. Once we got that Fair Warning article, we were able to share that. So we were able to call them out, I think, pretty effectively.
Awesome. Okay. Can you speak on the rationale for focusing on menthol instead of tobacco 21?
Yeah, we had been really working on the menthol policy, as you saw, since 2015, and kind of started it out as a flavored policy that didn't include menthol, with the full intention of coming back and adding menthol once we had really done a lot of community outreach and build that support for it. So T21 really didn't enter our plans until it was brought up by council members in the summer, while we were really in the thick of the policy movement. I think it had the potential to derail us, but because we had done so much community outreach and support, it wasn't something that got a lot of traction, at least at that point. And it came kind of organically from community or council members because of all the traction that's getting around the country and now in some of our suburban communities locally.
In Minneapolis, I would say, so Minnesota is generally a really healthy state. I mean, on every indicator, we're one of the healthiest states in the nation. But when you look deeper, we have actually the worst health disparities in the nation as well. And that's something that, especially in Minneapolis, they're really trying to tackle. They really want to try to push forward policies that address equity, health disparities. And so I think that's why, in particular, we thought that our coalition really felt like Tobacco 21 is a great goal, but it's not exactly hitting on the disparities issue that we really want to hit on. So I think it was a tough spot to be in, because we, on the one hand, we're saying, yeah, that's a great goal, let's work on that later, but right now we really want you to protect communities that have been targeted specifically by the tobacco industry for decades. So I think Tobacco 21 is something we could go back for, but we really wanted to try to hit on that equity piece.
Thank you. Okay. Are there plans for evaluation of the economic impact or lack thereof on the community?
Well, the tobacco industry did their own, which is actually pretty funny. We got a copy of it, but we are planning a number of different types of evaluation activities. We probably will do some kind of point of sale assessment. And we may do something with like Nielsen data or something like that. We're still trying to figure that out. Try to more get at the economic arguments. We're able to find quite a few data points from tobacco, or I should say convenience store industry publications that helped us. So, I mean, there's some stuff we already had that helped us, but we probably gather some more.
I think probably one of the easiest things to gather, and we work closely with the cities on enforcement, is do we see a huge drop in the number of tobacco vendors overall? But actually measuring the amount of money they lose is pretty hard, because it requires their willingness to give us that data, which is impossible.
Awesome. How did you determine what is a menthol product, since most tobacco sold actually contains menthol?
Yeah, this was something that we worked closely with the Public Health Law Center to craft language that really specified what a flavored tobacco product was. And so it's basically anything that has a characterizing taste or flavor of menthol, mint, wintergreen. And an indicator of that could be the packaging and the name of the product, but not necessarily, it doesn't actually require that. So it basically is, if it has a taste or flavor or scent, I think, of menthol, then it's considered to be a menthol product.
Okay.
Public Health Law Center was great with that.
Great. Okay, have any businesses blamed the city for going out of business after the policy went into effect? If yes, what was your and the city's response?
Well, the policies aren't in effect yet. But this economic study that I think it was actually the Coalition of Neighborhood, whatever that retailers did, they paid an economist to do some kind of analysis, and it's according to that analysis, well, there's a lot of ifs. So they have a lot of assumptions, and they say there's like 30 stores in Minneapolis that basically need menthol to survive. So they're claiming already that 30 stores are going to close, but since it's not in effect yet, we haven't seen that. I think it did help us that we broke out flavored tobacco and menthol, because the first time when we just tackled other flavors, they said the exact same things, like, oh, we're all going to go out of business and it's going to be the end of the world, and none of that happened. So the arguments lost a little steam the second time around. But yeah, it remains to be seen.
Okay, so it is almost 1 o'clock and I want to be mindful of your time, but we have 2 more questions. Is it okay if we just go ahead and answer those and then?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. So were the groups political action committees? And if so, what were the pros and cons of that?
our groups, I assume they mean?
I guess so.
No, we're not political action committees. We're nonprofits. The funding that we have allows us to lobby, and we can lobby as nonprofits up to 25% of our.
She's clarifying. She said she means the pros and con groups and the committees and the ones that went against it.
Oh. No, they weren't, I don't think. They were lobbyists, all of them. And, you know, some of them, we felt, in Minnesota, you have to register as a lobbyist if you get more than $500 for lobbying. And we felt like some of these people that were coming in from the outside, like Kendrick Meek and, you know, Dixon, that they probably would have fit that definition. And we thought a lot about, should we be reporting them? So I think our side was, we followed all of the rules. We did our lobbyist reporting. We registered. We were really, really cognizant of that because we didn't want that to be the reason that, you know, something went down. But I think the other side was a little, didn't follow the rules as much as they should have.
Okay, and our last question. In Minneapolis and St. Paul, what kind of spending budget / what dollar amount did you have for your entire campaign?
Probably, I mean, it was pretty substantial. I mean, I'm thinking of, we did a lot of subcontracts with community organizations. It's hard for me to exactly say how much, but we did have grants that allow for lobbying, which was really helpful.
And I mean, like, our team, I'm trying to think like how many staff worked on it. So we had funded community partners, and then we probably had the equivalent of like 2 or 3 full-time staff in each city working on it. Yeah, and over the course of, you know, 2 years. So it was pretty substantial. And we also received support from a local organization in doing some paid media. We didn't really touch on that as much, but there was some effort there as well to really strengthen our Beautiful Lie, Ugly Truth campaign.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing with us. And thank you all for attending this webinar. We are done now. If you have any questions about the actual webinar itself or the content, feel free to email me at rose@countertools.org. If you have any particular questions about Minneapolis or St. Paul, feel free to email Betsy or Alicia. Thank you all so much and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.